With this Guitar Lessons for Beginners video, we'll show you how to play the three basic minor chords, A minor, D minor, and E minor. We'll then apply basic fingerstyle technique to minor chords with a minor chord progression, along with guitar tabs and chord diagrams. We'll cover it all with this step-by-step approach. We'll start by learning how to play the easiest minor chord, and that would be an E minor. E minor is easy to learn to play because you only have to use two fingers to fret with, while the other strings are played without fretting, also known as open strings. But regarding the fretting fingers, if you look at the fretting hand here, with the second or middle finger, that's placed on the 5th string 2nd fret, while the 3rd finger is placed right next to it on the 4th string 2nd fret. So we're fretting with two fingers, but if you look at the chord diagram, well, first you might want to match up the fingers. The numbers in the black circles represent the finger numbers. But if you look above that, above the black line on the chord diagram, you'll see a bunch of O's or zeros. And that represents playing those other strings open. So even though we're fretting two strings with an E minor, you're actually going to play all 6. And how we're going to learn to play it, we're not going to strum the E minor chord. That's the easy way out. Instead, you want to learn how to play these chords as arpeggios. An arpeggio is when you play each individual string on its own. And that's a little bit more challenging to do, but if you can get a clear sounding arpeggio, your chords simply sound better when it comes time to strum. So you always want to go about it slowly, so if you don't get clarity on certain strings, you can sort of adjust it in the middle of an arpeggio. Here's an example. Oh, we have a little buzz on that 4th string. So rather than just going through all 6 and then starting over again, if you go about it slowly, oh, you say, oh, there's an issue there. Adjust the hand, get clarity, restart, and then keep working at it until you get all 6 strings to ring clear. Now, as we work on these minor chords, it's one thing to learn how to play each minor chord, but it's just as important to be able to associate a mood or a tone with minor chords so you can get acclimated to recognizing them by ear. And a good example or a good way to do that is to compare major chords to minor chords in playing arpeggios. So what we're going to do is we already know E minor, but we're going to go to an E major chord. If you don't know an E major, it's basically an E minor with except the first finger is down on the 3rd string 1st fret. And what we're going to do is play an E major arpeggio and compare that to an E minor arpeggio. And then you can hear that difference in mood or tone. So we're only going to play the bottom 4 strings. So starting with E major. If you're following along, it's very important to make sure you get clarity, because that's the only way we're going to recognize the difference in tone is if we hear each note clearly. So we'll do that one more time. And then just simply lift the first finger, which goes to E minor. And we're going to do that comparison again, and hopefully you can hear that shift in tone or mood from sort of happy to sad or serious. That's the fundamental difference between a major chord or a minor chord. It's just one note, but by just changing or altering that one note, you go to a more sad or serious tone. Now, if you have the E major chord down, it'll make it easier to learn our next minor chord shape. If we take the basic E major chord and we simply shift everything over a string, technically it's going up a string because we're going to higher sounding strings. So if we shift that shape over and play just the top 5 strings, so we have a 5th string bass note, this is an A minor chord. And again, if you already know E major, it's just a matter of shifting that chord shape over to go to A minor. So from that E major shape, if you just lift the first finger, you have an E minor. If you shift the entire shape over, you have an A minor chord. And let's do 3 arpeggios in a row of A minor just to get acclimated to the sound. Here we go. Finally, we have a D minor chord shape, and you may notice I am not fretting a D minor right now because we want to give you or help you and challenge you at the same time by seeing if you can read the chord diagram shown on the screen and play a D minor arpeggio on your own. Of course, I will show you, but if you want to temporarily pause the video right now, see if you can teach yourself a D minor arpeggio. And here's how to play a D minor arpeggio. It'll only be the top 4 strings. It'll sound like this. D minor might be a little bit more challenging than the E minor and A minor chord shapes, so if you happen to be struggling, especially maybe getting those top 2 strings to ring, that is understandable. But let's do 3 D minor arpeggios in a row. Now as this lesson progresses, we're going to be doing a lot more of these minor chords. We're going to try some fingerstyle technique, and also we're going to work on playing these chords in a progression to work on chord changes. But for a lot of you, if you're sort of an absolute beginner, you may want to soak in just working on the 3 minor chords for however long it takes, a few days or even a week, to make sure you have clear sounding arpeggios that you can play pretty quickly. And what I mean by that is, if you see an A minor, if someone requests an A minor chord, for example, you want to be able to play a clear sounding arpeggio within 5 seconds. That's how you know you have your 3 basic minor chords down. Now that may seem like a lot, but let me give you an example of how that would work. So let's say I called off an A minor, go, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. You may have noticed it took me about 3.5 seconds just to get to an A minor chord. It only takes about 1.5 seconds to play an arpeggio. So before we move on to switching chords, it's a good idea to make sure you can play each chord within 5 seconds of hearing it or seeing it. What we're going to do in this video, in the next clip, is we'll give you a 5-second challenge for each chord. I'll call off a minor chord and play it within 5 seconds. And if you can keep up with the next clip, then you'll be ready to go on to the next section. E minor. D minor. A minor. The next step is to make things a little bit more musical sounding with these minor chords by applying basic fingerstyle or fingerpicking technique to each chord. And with basic fingerstyle technique, you need to first know how to align and assign the fingers. For most of you who are right-handed, the right hand fingers, you need to align and assign your fingers to pluck certain strings. And that would mean the first finger is aligned or assigned to the 3rd string, the middle or 2nd finger to the 2nd string, the 3rd finger to the top or 1st string. So those fingers are sort of resting along there. And meanwhile, the thumb will pluck either the 4th, 5th, or 6th strings, depending on the bass note of the chord. So we're going to start with an E minor chord. And for an E minor, we have a total of 6 strings in that chord. Therefore, the bass note is the 6th string. So we're going to pluck that with the thumb, skip over the other 2, and go right to the top 3 strings. So here's how a basic fingerstyle technique would sound. We're just going to start with 4 notes. 6, then the 3rd string, then the 2nd string, and then the 1st string. Now if we took that a little bit further, we want to show you a basic fingerstyle pattern. We're going to add 2 more notes. We're going to sort of ascend and descend down the strings. Here's what I mean. And this basic fingerstyle pattern we're going to use for pretty much the remainder of this lesson. So let's get acclimated to it. Let's play it 4 times in a row. We'll apply the basic fingerstyle technique to E minor. 1, 2, ready, go. Now, if we get a little more technical regarding the bass note of the chord, you might find this interesting. The bass note for all of these basic chords will be the same letter name as the chord itself. So if we have an E minor chord, the bass note is E. And if you know how to find notes on the guitar, if we apply some guitar logic, well, it's pretty easy. That bottom string is E, and E is the bass note of an E minor chord. And why I'm bringing this up, we did some fingerstyle technique using the bottom string open, the 6th string open, which is E. But with E minor, it's kind of a neat thing you can do. You can actually also use the 4th string as a bass note. We are fretting the 4th string on the 2nd fret. And if we applied some guitar logic, what is that letter note? Well, the 4th string open is D, D sharp, E. We have another E note. It's an octave higher than this E. So you could do a fingerstyle run as well. In fact, I'm doing 4 in a row right now. So there's a little variation you can apply to an E minor chord. In fact, just for kicks, let's do 4 in a row, but I'm going to alternate between the 6th and the 4th string, playing this basic fingerstyle pattern for E minor. So here's how that'll sound. Next we'll go to an A minor chord, and we're going to apply the same fingerstyle technique and pattern to A minor. The 1, 2, and 3 fingers are still aligned and assigned to the same top 3 strings. The only difference will be the bass note, and you might recall the A minor has 5 total strings, therefore the 5th string is the bass note. And based on what we just talked about in the previous clip, we know that bass note to be A. The open 5th string is A. So here's how an A minor chord will sound with this basic fingerstyle technique, and we'll do 3 in a row. For D minor, everything's the same. The only difference will be the bass note. Now it'll be the open 4th string, which is D. And let's do 3 in a row of a D minor with the basic fingerstyle technique. Next, we're going to take everything we've learned and put it together into what I call a minor chord progression. And the new challenge with this progression will not only be to fine-tune that fingerstyle technique, but also to work on some chord changes as well. And when it's all put together, it sort of sounds like a mini song. It resembles a lot of songs you have heard before. And the good news about learning to play this minor chord progression is if we already have that basic fingerstyle pattern down from the previous clips, we don't need to use any type of written music, piano music or guitar tabs to memorize it. We only need to use chord symbols and indicate how many times to fingerpick each chord below the chord symbols. And that's what's shown here on the screen. That's the complete minor chord progression. Now, of course, doing the whole thing right off the bat is asking too much. We're going to break it into 3 sections, and we're going to learn one section at a time, starting with the next clip. For section 1, we'll play A minor 4 times, followed by D minor twice, and then back to A minor 2 times. So we'll do a slow walkthrough of section 1. 1, 2, ready, go. Section 2 will play E minor twice and then D minor 2 times. And then we're going to repeat E minor 2 times and D minor 2 times. Now the one catch with this is for the E minor, we're going to use the 4th string bass note that we talked about earlier. Again, the 4th string 2nd fret if we're fretting the E minor. 4th string 2nd fret is E, so is the bottom string. But for this particular progression, it simply sounds better using the 4th string bass note. So let's rehearse the middle section. Again, E minor 2 times, D minor 2 times, E minor 2 times, D minor 2 times. 4th string bass note for E minor, and it'll be the same bass note when we go to D minor, except that 4th string will be open. So here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. For the third and final section, we go back to A minor, and technically we play 4 measures of A minor, but the 4th measure we're going to strum an A minor to end the progression, and then before that we apply the fingerstyle technique. We do 3 measures with fingerstyle, and then the 4th measure is the strum. So let's put together that 3rd and final section. Here's how it'll sound. The next clip we'll put it all together playing the complete minor chord progression, and the minor chord progression has 3 challenges in one. 1, the fingerstyle technique that we just learned. 2, switching chords. And the 3rd challenge, it's not for everyone, but for some people, will be to actually play it by memory. You don't want to rely on looking at the progression or the chord symbols too much. You want to be able to just pick up the guitar and play along. And you're probably going to need to do that to keep up with the next clip. So with that, try playing along with the next clip, and when you can keep up or follow it, you know you have this lesson down. Now, if you made it this far in the lesson, you've got a great foundation for understanding how minor chords work in music. Number one, we've got 3 minor chord shapes memorized. We know how to apply basic fingerstyle technique to these minor chords. And we also know how these minor chords work or sound when played together in a progression that produces an overall sad or serious tone when you use minor chords exclusively. You can have a little bit more fun with this progression as a little bonus for this lesson. In the next clip, you'll hear the same progression played. It's sort of like a foundation or sort of a background. It's not a song per se, but you can have other instruments play over that progression. And that's what we'll do in the next clip. You'll hear how a soloist can harmonize with this progression. Actually, it's using the minor scale. And if you're interested in learning how to improvise or use scales, I have plenty of lessons on those as well. But in the next clip, you can hear how the minor chord progression sounds with a melody played over it. With this lesson now complete, combined with your previous guitar basics lessons, you now have a great foundation to start teaching yourself some basic guitar songs. Now, regarding fingerstyle technique, you might not want to jump into classics like Stairway to Heaven or Dust in the Wind right away. Instead, a few less challenging pieces, such as Greensleeves or Allegro, would be the logical next step up to combine fingerstyle with minor chords.